Hey. Hello, and welcome to the chat of Nightshift with Andrea up late and my statue of a co-host, Brian Sanders. Hello, we got Felony Melanie, we got Abby, we got David J, and I thought I saw a silly in there somewhere a second ago. How are y'all doing? How are you doing?
Can you remove me?
Yeah, I can remove you. I can remove you. Welcome back to Nightshift, guys. This is a true crime podcast. We come to you every Tuesday night live on YouTube on the Andrea Up Late YouTube channel. And then we stream to audio podcasts wherever you like to listen to those when you're going for a run or riding in your car or planning your next crime, whatever it is that you may be doing when you listen. You think you're back?
I'm getting there.
Getting there. Okay. Yeah. So for anybody who might be new to listen to the show, this is a true crime show, and I will give the warnings as accompanied with this particular topic here in a moment when we get started with it. It's pretty wild. And so you're going to kind of probably experience quite a mixture of emotions as we go through it. It's not a very, very long case, and it is solved, which is a bit unlike what we typically do. So it's kind of cut and dried in a certain kind of way, but it does become a survivor story that's pretty incredible. So we're about to get to that. This crime occurred in 1978. And so once Brian is back on with us here in a moment, I will let him go over all the pop culture references from that year. And saying that to you, Felony, you still in here? So I had a fun conversation. Melanie, may I disclose our conversation that we had today? And again, if you're new here, since this is a live YouTube show, we generally kind of speak back and forth with the people in the chats. It's free to do that. You just log into YouTube, use your email and password, and then you can hop in the chats anytime with us while we're live and ask questions about the case or just generally banter with us. And we talk a little bit at the beginning. We get to the case, and then we do a lot more chit-chatting here at the very end. So, so I got a message today from one of our friends, Felony Melanie. She's here in the chats tonight, recommending Donnie Wahlberg as a potential guest because he's been doing this whole scary people thing on, it's on ID, right? On that network, Investigation Discovery. And so he's got some stuff going and some podcast versions of that going. And so I said, you know what? That's something we should do is reach out and see. I think old Donald seems to be pretty cool guy, pretty nice guy. So I think he might entertain the idea, right?
I've never spoken ill of the man.
Do you speak of him really at all?
Of Donnie Wahlberg?
Yeah.
I speak highly of him.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So anyway, Melanie, no, silly, I'm not cheating on our sisterhood at all, and I think you can get in on this one. So Melanie and I both had the same thought process when I said that we've recently come across some old clips of stuff from New Kids on the Block from all those years ago. And particularly the clips of the black and white, y'all, it was a VHS tape. A lot of it was in black and white because that was supposed to make it cool, right?
It did.
And as a grown woman watching it, it makes me laugh so hard because I think it was the first time that I laid in my living room floor and thought, like, who are the whores in the video with these boys? I was so irritated and jealous by all of them, and I was a child, and I look at it now and those boys are 12, 14, 15 during the taping of all that, and it's hysterical. But Melanie was saying the same thing, like, you remember everything, you remember all the, of these kinds of things that you watched so much as a kid. So it's been funny to talk about with her today. She also had the same question I did about the ladies in the pool hall and on the Ferris wheel, and it's fine.
Tramps.
Ladies, I got Marine's blood in the house. Yeah, so that was like she did her a little angry. So yeah, we need to talk, maybe reach out to him. So moving forward, would you like to speak to our friends?
I like to go wide-eyed sometimes.
About whatever pop culture references we have from the year that this case took place. We try to do this when we can, and this particular case took place, like I said, in 1978.
I was just graduating high school in 78. That's not even funny because it's
close.
It is not close. Garfield debuted in newspaper comic strips. Not Heathcliff. Garfield.
Raise your hand if you agree with me. Heathcliff is like the rose art to Garfield's Crayola.
Yes.
And even saying that, I'm really kind of indifferent with Garfield as it is. I wasn't a big fan, but
if you got to watch one or the other,
if I had to pick
Garfield.
one,
yeah. Star Wars Holiday Special apparently aired in 1978.
I'd rather watch Garfield.
I hadn't heard about it. Look, I had to watch a little of the trailer earlier. So if I was absent-minded, it's because I was watching B. Arthur, starring in Star Wars Holiday Special.
Oh, she was in that?
She was in it. Like B. Arthur from Golden Girls.
And Maude. Yeah,
there were a few other actors and actresses, but
interesting. Yeah, I had no idea. I don't even think I knew that was a thing that happened.
It's weird. I've never done LSD, but it felt like probably what a bad trip would feel.
Well, when you put B. Arthur, Star Wars, and Christmas together, I'm not sure how else we can.
And like a all white fur Wookiee. It's like a family of Wookiees.
Okay.
That's how it started out.
Next item.
I don't know. The first Trapper Keeper.
Oh, okay.
Hit the high school scene in 1970.
I always forget that they were around that. I mean, I always picture kind of early to mid 80s, so I always forget that they were around.
I don't remember Trapper Keepers like anything until mid 80s, I thought, is when it really.
Maybe it's when it took off.
Yeah. Bob Seger.
Okay.
His album Stranger in Town. I think it hit the shelves in March.
Okay.
And it's like by May it was already gold 6 times over.
That's insanity.
Hollywood Nights. Still the same.
Oh, come on.
But our favorite, We've Got Tonight.
Look, I encourage you when the show is over to go listen to We've Got Tonight, Bob Seger.
Yeah.
And it had, of course, many people covered it and did really well, but go back and listen to Bob's. Fantastic. Okay.
Yeah. Charlie Chaplin.
Okay.
He died in 1977. By 1978, though, his deceased body and coffin are dug up and stolen.
That's right.
Isn't that crazy?
I kind of always forget that fact, but yes.
Yeah. And
bet it was Ricky Queso.
Who?
That's the satanic panic teenage murderer. It's fine. We covered the case. Go ahead.
Yeah.
He did some grave robbing.
I got you. I got sidetracked. Thought it was the gamer that I got to knock out for what he said. Was that Queso or something? Anyway, remember the one that was like talking about you?
The gamer?
Yeah.
What gamer?
That heavyset guy, like said something about.
What gamer? What game?
I don't know. He's a gamer. I don't know his tag. I think it's something like that. Queso or something.
I don't talk to gamers.
No, you don't. Someone else we know did. And then that guy made a comment, remember, about.
Okay, well, you have to remind me later.
Whatever. Okay. So, but Charlie Chaplin's body and coffin are stolen, and his wife receives a $600,000 ransom note. Or ransom. A request for a ransom, $600,000. But by May, Swiss cops have arrested 2 suspects and actually recovered his body. That's nuts. I've never heard of a deceased kidnapping ransom.
No, I thought you were going to say that she was like awarded that somehow, like from the state, because that happened. And then I thought, well, then do you think she dug him up?
Yeah. That's crazy though.
That is wild.
I don't know. I don't know. What kind of charge is that? Basically a larceny? Let's see. 1978's the first Unabomber attack. He gets arrested 1970 or 1996. President Carter lifts the ban on making beer in your home.
Oh.
I guess you couldn't do it before. Coors Light makes its debut.
Okay.
It's a big part of my childhood. Dusty Rhodes is Wrestler of the Year by Pro Wrestling Illustrated.
I can tell who's picking out the pop culture.
Right?
Okay.
Jonestown Massacre occurs.
This is a crime show. We can lead with that one.
Oh, did you want me to lead with Richard Chase got arrested that year?
Okay.
Okay. That's all I got.
Okay.
That Star Wars holiday thing threw me for a loop. Sorry. I don't
We've got
remember
Jonestown, but we talked about Star Wars Christmas for 5 minutes.
I'm so sorry. it's like B. Arthur and
That's
Art
really
Carney.
weird.
Art
Really
Carney's
weird.
in it.
I don't.
And the dude from Carol Burnett, Harvey.
Oh yeah.
He's dressed as a woman robot or
that
something.
sounds right. He was
It's
like
so
that.
bizarre.
Oh
my gosh. Okay.
Look at Silly's question and see if I answered it correctly. I think I
Okay.
did. All right. We're going to get started. Y'all, if you haven't heard of this case, I can't tell. It's, I don't know. I mean, it's out there, but you don't hear it a whole ton on a lot of like the podcasts and things. I mean, there's plenty on it, but anyway, it's the case of Mary Vincent, again, out of 1978. Mary Vincent grew up in Las Vegas. She was a very promising dancer. So she had traveled a pretty decent amount in her young childhood as her father was in the service. So Mary danced on stages in Vegas, Australia, Hawaii. She was in like an America, like a Miss America type pageant, and did well there with the dancing. But things at home were starting to change. Her parents were loving. She and her parents, I think, have never been described as having an extremely close relationship. Now, there were, I believe, 5 or 7 children at home. It was a very large family, and mom and dad both worked. So, that's kind of understandable that maybe like dinner times around the, family table weren't very frequent or whatever. But I think that it's always kind of described that maybe there was just a little rift in the relationship between Mary and her mom and dad. But by the time she was 15, she'd been pushing back a little bit, and her parents were actually in the process of what became kind of a pretty nasty divorce. And so, as you can imagine, at 15, this was difficult for Mary. And this was essentially the straw that broke the camel's back for her. So she chose to go on and run away. This wasn't really crazy for 2 things. For the time, right? We talk about the 70s and hitchhiking often on this show because it is a crime show, and we've learned these days we're not hitchhiking, right? Like these days, it's you make sure that the Uber has the sign and the license plate matches and the app verifies and, all your triple, quadruple steps to double check. But back then, hitchhiking was actually pretty common, and it was actually fairly common for Mary. So she'd kind of run off a couple of times before. So we talk about this in some of these cases. When a kid has done this before, that means that when they do it again, that doesn't mean that their parents are not worried, but it's not initial just shock and fear in that kind of way. So she goes on to run away. She and a boyfriend of hers going out to California. They kind of sleep in his car. Subsequently, he's actually arrested. I'm not sure how old he was. He was arrested during this time. So they've hitchhiked away from Las Vegas area where she lived to California. And I believe they're around like in the San Francisco area. But he was then arrested while they were out there just a few days later, not very long, on charges of raping a high school girl. So I'm not sure. She's only 15 herself. Mm-hmm. Mary is. So I don't know how old this guy is. I'm saying the charges could be one and the same in that sense.
Yeah.
So they do that, but she decides to stay. She was kind of there for another day or two, and then she decides that she's going to actually head to her grandfather's house. He lived south of where she was currently and he lived in Los Angeles. So she makes the decision that she's just going to kind of hitch her way down south toward LA to stay with her grandfather for a while. She's kind of just not really looking to go back home right that moment. So she finds herself in the company of a couple of other hitchhikers, and they make some small talk. They're starting to get along, have conversation, and, kind of sharing each other's stories and where you headed, what you doing. They realize they're headed kind of in the same direction. Okay. So the 3 of them kind of walk around talking, waiting for a ride. Well, this will be September 28th of 1978. So as you can imagine, it's pretty hot outside. Around this time, 50-year-old Lawrence Singleton pulls up in a blue van. So they ask this man for a ride, and he tells the other 2 hitchhikers essentially that he only takes female hitchhikers, and he also doesn't have room for them. And they thought this was odd for a couple of reasons. As you can imagine, the red flag went up on the female hitchhiker comment. But also as they kind of peered in the van, they realized that except for the driver and passenger seats, how you can remove the seats from some of those older vans like that. The seats were gone in the back. So it was fairly empty. So nothing to indicate that he couldn't physically actually fit them in there. So they even kind of tried to urge Mary to let's wait for the next ride. They were a bit uneasy. But she was just kind of over it. She was ready to get going. She wanted to get to her grandfather's house. And she thought that Lawrence had what she considered to be kind of a kind smile. Again, he was 50. He had kind of a rounder face. And she thought that he reminded her a little bit of her grandfather. So she took these all as good signs and hopped in the car with him, the van, tells her new hitchhiking buddies goodbye, and off they go. So let me see here. Sorry. There we go. So after they had been driving for not too long, he actually says to Mary that he needs to run by his house really quick. He says, hey, are you good with me? It's just a little bit out of the way. I need to run by my house and grab something and run this little errand. And so Mary agrees to do so, and he does. He drives to his house. There she smokes a cigarette or two while he goes inside. He comes back out, and they kind of start back on their way. Well, any initial feelings of, kind of doubt that she had with Lawrence are kind of dwindling because he's been talking to her. He's been kind with her. And again, he asked to go to his house. She says yes. And he does that thing that he asked, and they get back on the road. So everything's kind of checking out as far as she's concerned right now. So they start to leave. And as they're driving down the road, Mary pulls out her cigarettes. And when she lights up one of her cigarettes and started to inhale, it caused her to sneeze. And when she does, as she kind of blinks and then sneezes and opens her eyes, he's reached over and he's already taken her kind of with his hand to the back of her neck and kind of pulled her in a little closer. And then after she sneezes, he put his hand on her forehead and said, let's check and see if you have a fever. So, yeah, it was just a sneeze. You don't know her. Yeah. So she's starting to, she recounts all of this. So when I say she feels this way or thinks that way, these are her own words over the years later on. She, that started to cause a bit of uneasiness. So after a while, she realizes their route seems kind of off. So they're on what's called, I guess the 5. I don't know anything. You guys can just come at me in the comments about California highways and byways and overpasses and whatnot. But they're basically on a road that essentially just goes north and south, and it's pretty straightforward from what I understand. There's not a lot of confusion there. You're either going north or you're going south, and it's pretty straight away. So she realizes that it doesn't seem the direction they need to be going. And so she confronts him about this, and he kind of played dumb and, oh yeah, I guess we're going north. They needed to be going south. And around this time, she had seen a stick in between two of the van seats that was kind of long and thin, and it was kind of pointy on the end. So she grabs it and she looks at him with the stick in hand and says, hey, I can take care of myself. You need to turn this van around.
Okay.
So he says, oh, yeah, my apologies. And so he's completely doing what she asked. He says, okay. And he slows the van down, and he gets to a spot where he can pull off the road, and he does. But this is a pretty desolate area from what I understand. Bless you, everybody. Take a drink. Go on and prepare your livers because it's springtime, which means that Brian Sanders will be sneezing multiple times during the show. And if you are new here, this has become our drinking game. So pick up your coffee, your tea, your cocktail, whatever you got.
We get sponsored.
Maybe your Claritin. Oh my goodness. So again, she confronts him with the stick, says she can take care of herself, and she does have confidence. And you've got to think she has to already anyway, in the sense that she's 15, taking rides from strangers, for not the first time. So he pulls over, and that's what I was saying. This is a pretty desolate area. So once you kind of get out of the cities around there, it's pretty dark, pretty barren, not a lot of people around, okay? Not a lot of buildings or whatnot. So he pulls off of the road, and and nothing is inside as far as I can see. And so when he does, he says, "Oh, hang on." And he said he had to go to the bathroom. So he hops out to pee. She hops out and was starting to think in her head about the fact that her shoelaces were untied. She had been kind of just sitting there that way to be comfortable. And she has the forethought to think, if I need to run or if I decide to leave, and that was kind of what was in her head as she was exiting the van, was like kind of at that crossroads of making the decision on whether or not she was going to go on and try to make a run for it and go. She had become increasingly more uneasy around Lawrence. And so she bends over to tie her shoes. And when she does, Lawrence comes behind her with a sledgehammer in hand and knocks her in the back of the head with a sledgehammer. She falls over. It knocks her out pretty immediately. And he then proceeds to take her and put her back in the van. So I will go on and give you a warning now that there's definitely like sexual assaults, triggers, these kinds of things that we're going to be talking about. So if it's something that you're not comfortable listening to, that's what we're going to talk about here for a little bit. But when she wakes, she's not wearing any clothes, and he makes her drink this drink. So he had been, as he's driving, kind of taking back big swigs out of a couple of like milk, like containers, like milk jugs that he had put. Some sources say liquor, some sources say just like an unknown substance that kind of made her feel woozy, which I mean could be liquor, but I'm not sure if it was laced with anything else. But he makes her drink on some of that drink, and he ties her up in the back of the van. Remember, this van is without its back seat, so it's just cargo space. If you've never seen a van like that, it's just a hard metal floor. Some people would put a carpet in it. And he starts to tie her up. So he almost essentially is like quartering her. So like each ankle, each wrist is tied separately. Okay. He proceeds to just have his way. He rapes her mercilessly, over and over for hours. At this point, she's had more of this drink that he's forcing her to drink. And between that and the trauma of what she's enduring, she's kind of in and out of passing out during some of this time. And finally, she does fully kind of pass out. Eventually, she wakes up, and he was asleep. So he had finally fallen asleep, but she can't do anything. She's naked and she's bound. So she can do nothing with herself. And so by morning time, he finally is getting up, and she is pleading for her life. We've talked about this with victims, like things that people will say, and she's saying, I won't tell anybody. I don't even care for anybody to know. Just like, let me go, get me the hell out of here. I want to go, and continues to plead for her life and ask him to set her free. So finally, he says, in a kind of bizarre turn of events, you want to be free? Do you want to be free? Well, I'll set you free. And these were some famous last words, because at this point, Lawrence drags Mary out of the van. He drags her kind of away from the van into the landscape a little bit. And, excuse me, he goes and gets a hatchet out of the van and comes back. So this is where kind of a different part of your emotions is going to play in. So he grabs her left arm, and she's kind of trying to struggle. She's still a bit tied. He grabs her left arm, and with a mighty swing, he hacks at her arm just around the elbow area below the shoulder. Okay. She's kind of confused. This is all happening obviously very quickly. She's struggling. She's holding on to him, and he continues to swing. And at this point, she's starting to fall backward. So it's actually quite eerie is not even the word. When she describes in detail this encounter and her recollection of it, because she remembers every single detail, which I think is wild. I mean, I believe her, don't get me wrong, but it's just insane. And so she says that she's confused because she's starting to stumble and fall backward, but he's cut her left forearm off. And then now she's grabbing at him with her right arm, with her right hand, as hard as she can, because she's struggling to stand. And as she's falling back, she doesn't know why. He's been hacking at her right arm now. And what she realizes he starts flailing his arms, and when he's flailing his arms as though, like, let's say you're trying to like get a spider off of you or something.
Mm-hmm.
And she realizes in that moment that her confusion is because she's falling backward, but her right hand was still attached to his arm because when he hacked it off, her nerves were still tense and clenched, and her hand is still grasping his forearm. The idea of that sight is something that feels like it's not even real life. There's a couple of those scenes, if you will, during the story that if you picture it or think about it in a horror movie, that's what it feels like you're watching. So real quick, Abby in the chat says, can you stay conscious under these circumstances? You know, this is very subjective and very person dependent. I would say the majority of the time people don't, but by now, just the shock of it all. A good example that's not exactly the same scenario, obviously, in terms of trauma, but if you ever watch little clips of like reels with people on rides that maybe drop quickly, or even like a roller coaster, and you see the one person who's kind of like, and they immediately pass out, and they come to, and they pass out, and they come to, whereas many of the other people on the Ferris wheel are not passing out. It's just very body dependent and what your body can tolerate in the sense of shock. And so he flings and flings, and then finally her right hand that had been connected to him falls off of him. And while this wasn't enough, he picks up Mary's body and throws her down a 30-foot ravine or cliff there where all this is taking place. Okay. So he throws her down there. She breaks ribs in the process. I mean, this is all very, very brutal. Again, she's 15 years old. It doesn't matter how old she is, you know, in the sense of how horrible this is, but that's something to remember when we think about her just like fortitude throughout all of this. So he throws her down there, and then he realizes that he's concerned that she's still not quite concealed enough for passersby. So he proceeds to climb down this cliff, pick her up. I think she was like 5'2", like she's a very small girl, and basically stuffs her body in a concrete drain down there at the bottom of the ravine. At this point, he thinks she's dead. She's starting to lose consciousness a bit here. And it varies between whether or not he thought she was dead, or at least thought she was going to be dead pretty soon. So he leaves, excuse me. And this is when she will talk about the very moment that she realized intentionally that she had to fight the urge to pass out. She knew that she was going to die. If she passed out, she's going to lose blood. She's missing both of her arms now, right? So she also said that in this moment, she had this feeling of a presence. Now, I will say that I've not read any accounts where she ever grew up very like religiously, or she doesn't like speak of, God or spirituality and like her interviews and these kinds of things. But she said she felt a presence with her, and she can't really explain it other than that. And it told her essentially like, you have to go, like you have to fight, or else somebody else is going to die. And she has said consistently over the years, that's exactly the thought that was in her head. So she proceeds to turn around and like try to get up this ravine. Y'all, she's missing arms that have been amputated with a hacksaw, both of them the forearms are gone. Okay. Remember the part where I told you that he threw her down a 30-foot ravine. So that's her only way back up. Okay. So what does she do to stop the bleeding? So this girl is savvy. I'll tell you that. She immediately took what was left of her arms and shoved them in the mud and dirt around her to try to mitigate the bleeding. And she'll say that as the hours go on, she's having to kind of do this over and over. So she shoves them in the mud and then raising them over her head to try to slow the bleeding any way she possibly can. So she has got broken ribs and amputated arms, and she has to get up a 30-foot ravine. So it's taken her hours, but she does it. So using just the more and more and more I've thought about this story, and I think about just what that would have looked like stumbling, trying, and the things that don't even matter with what's happened to her, right? Stepping on burrs and the rocks and the sticks and and scraping her knees and whatever. And She finally starts to make it up to the top, and eventually she hears cars on the road. She just knew she had to get, by now it's nightfall. It's gotten dark again. So she knows she has to get to where passing headlights are going to actually see her. There's not like street lamps and things on this type of highway. Okay. So when she starts to hear cars, this motivates her to get up and over that last little bit of the ledge of the ravine. So she gets to the top, and she starts to get over to the actual roadway. Okay. So the first car sees her. It's got two individuals in it. I believe two men. Kind of sees her. It's like she registers that they see her, and it speeds off. And so this is something that I've noticed has been a little disputed when I hear people talking about it. It's almost a what would you do? Because people say, oh, how awful. And then some people say, oh, it had to have looked like something out of a horror movie. You know, and so you've got to understand at this point, poor Mary, she's naked. She's covered in mud and blood, and she's missing two arms, like fresh wounds. So I can't even begin to fathom what that looked like or what that would feel like if you're driving by. They don't have cell phones either. That's another thing. It's not like you drive by and you're calling 911 to say, hey, this crazy thing just happened that I saw. What are you doing? What do you think you're doing back then?
Back then, I would have stopped. Now, I feel like I'd be like, oh, that's a prank. Got some goofy kids out there filming something stupid for YouTube.
For YouTube, yeah.
Because it's so over the top.
That's what I'm saying when I say there's so many parts of this that feel like an actual horror movie. And I was like reading one source that even said like, but like even if you're watching it in a horror movie, you're thinking, oh, that's so far-fetched. Or like there's no way she'd make it out alive, or there's no way that would happen, you know? And that's precisely what did happen. So so the second car, and listen to this, like when we talk about coincidences or just pretty cool things that happen, the second car had actually missed their exit on the highway. So they were only where they were in front of her because they had missed the exit before them. So when they see her, they stop. And we can talk later about it, but in the later years, that couple winds up moving out of the area. The wife winds up like not being able to sleep alone for years. He goes out, and he had not been a really big gun guy, goes out and get a gun. Like they were heavily traumatized just from witnessing Mary in the site that, you know, the state she was in when they got her. So again, though, no cell phones, right? Y'all. So they have to get her to the nearest place they can. And so they rush her. They're pretty quick thinking to the nearest airport, which was not too far away. And she gets there and they fly her to the hospital. Okay. And Mary does survive. And so this is very unlike a lot of the cases that we cover, in that, like I said, it's solved and she does survive, but it is a wild ride between start and finish here. So she's flown to the hospital. When she gets there, the nurses will say that she had a great disposition. First of all, obviously, she's kind of in and out of consciousness by this point, but doctors say that she had lost half of her volume of blood. So as you can imagine, medically, she's receiving multiple blood transfusions and all these things just to kind of get her back to stable. And once they do, it wasn't long before, just within days, they're fitting her for prosthetics. The hospital staff will say that she just basically always had a smile on her face, like in the daytime hours. She was just so, I hate the word resilient because sometimes it's just coping, it's just whatever, you know, but you know, that she would be silly with them. She was very, very kind. She was very spunky. She was very eager to get the prosthetics. It wasn't like she was in this like trauma hold or this depressive state or anything like that while she was there at that time in the hospital. Now, conversely, you will hear that when she would sleep, though, there were times when she'd wake up running down the hall screaming, you know, all of these things were coming out in her sleep. And so when asked about that, at some point over the years, she has said that essentially she would just in the morning pray that she would be able to have something like enough space to breathe, like enough air to breathe that day to get through that day. And she said, and somehow I always get through that day. And that's just kind of how she looked at it moving forward. But again, she's 15 years old. Like she's still 15 from the time she left her home. It's only been a few days till this happens. So she's 15 years old. So, and that's something we're going to talk about, but essentially again, her fortitude and just like the inspiration that she is, even with the hardship of it all that she talks about, as the years go on. So like I said, she was being fitted for her prosthetics. Now the only thing she was a bit down about actually was her dancing, because if you remember at the start of the show, I told you she was a pretty talented dancer and had been, traveled a little bit dancing, had been awarded some trophies and things like that for it. And this horrible thing that happened to her took a lot of things from her. But it also took dancing, because they actually had to remove some muscles from her legs to place in her arms. So they had to just do some reconstructive stuff using parts of her legs. So her legs still work, but not to the capacity of her being able to dance the way she had been dancing. So it took her dancing from her. So she was able to leave the hospital eventually. Let me see. I'm going to go on and show you just so you can get an idea. And again, if you're new here, I'll put all these pictures on the Andrea Upload Instagram page. Here is Mary. Pretty soon after everything took place. Here she is again. I mean, she's got a smile on her face in nearly every picture you see of her, particularly back then. And that's something we'll talk about as this goes on. But I feel like she was almost smiling more in the immediate aftermath, and I think that things took a toll on her as some time went on. So that's some pictures of Mary. I will let you see the asshole. Here's Lawrence Singleton. So that's his booking photo, and this is because Mary was able to describe him to police and to a sketch artist so precisely that his neighbor, when they put that out, his neighbor recognized him and said, "Oh, that's my neighbor Lawrence."
Oh, wow. Okay.
And she will later say that she said something like, "I gave them every damn detail I could think of." And she said, I explained what he looked like as though I was talking to a blind person.
Okay.
She's 15.
Yeah.
Like, it's just like, I don't know. Like, I want to say I'm so proud of her. You know what I mean? Like, it's so wild. Yeah. So here is the sketch. And kudos to the sketch artist, obviously, as well. But based off of her description, here's the sketch rendering of Lawrence with a photo of him side by side. He's got a little Popeye going on in that left photo, does he not?
Yeah. Isn't that where, like, they don't have teeth, like their dentures are out or something?
Rare. Looks like he needs a pipe. Ugh. So that's some idea of what Mary and Lawrence look like. So get this. So just 6 months later is Lawrence's trial. Okay. And guess who shows up? Mary. And she's going to go on and testify. She has no qualms about doing this. She sits in the box and looks straight at this man and gives her account of exactly what happened that night. And she remembered it in detail. As an adult now, I think she's 60, 61 now. She'll say now, I remembered, I could feel everything. I could see everything. I knew everything that was happening to me. And she said, I could feel the sting, the pressure, the pulling as her arms were being amputated. She said, I could feel the hot wetness going down my body from when her arms were bleeding. And she, to this day, describes it in quite great detail. So, kind of like we referenced earlier about shock or, passing out or being unconscious from this, she kept a lot of it. So, So he has the trial 6 months later. And she's there with her prosthetic arms on, and he is found guilty of all charges. So do you want to know the sentence he got for this? Because it was like attempted murder. I forget what the one is that essentially comes down to like maiming, and torture. Obviously rape, sodomy, kidnapping, confinement, all of these. Do you guys want to guess?
I'd say probably minimum 99 years.
Right. You would think. So he got 14 years.
Where was this again?
You want to guess?
Was it California?
It was.
They've been jacked up for decades.
14 years. We got a lot of listeners from California.
Well,
they'll agree.
Oh, I know. I feel sorry for them.
Yeah, 14 years.
That doesn't make any sense, especially in 1978. That's crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's wild. And as he leaves, he is somehow able to get near enough to Mary that he whispers, "If it's the last thing I do, I'll finish the job."
Why do you don't tell me these things?
Isn't this wild? Okay, so 14 years. But guess what? He behaved himself in prison. So he got out in 8.
Nuh-uh.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
God. Oh. How in the world?
I don't know. It blows your mind. Like, and we talk. And they knew enough. 1978 was not 1878. Like, they knew enough then. Maybe they didn't, I don't know, quite grasp like recidivism and the things that we talk about. But when we talk about violent sexual offenders, and his was as violent as they come, I mean, without her dying, you're not stopping that. That you're going to do that again. You're going to continue down that path. That doesn't end.
Actually, I'm going to take that statement back. 1978, they were doing the same asinine stuff they're doing now in the judicial system in California.
Okay.
So actually, that does make sense. They were doing stupid stuff like that, which created a bigger problem in the 80s and 90s when crack epidemic and all that.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, okay. In the rest of the normal world, wouldn't operate that way. California, I think, and New York were probably setting the bar pretty low in the late 70s. That's crazy.
Yeah. Abby just asked where in California. I'd have to pull it out to see exactly what city they were in at that point, but basically she was leaving the like Bay Area to go to LA. So somewhere in between the two. So forgive me for not being super current on my California geography. Perfect. Okay. So he says that horrible thing to her as he leaves the courtroom. And like I said, 8 years later, we've got Lawrence Singleton out on the back out on the streets. But get this, he tries to go to like multiple cities and the towns literally run him out. Like hundreds of people will show up when they find out that he's trying to come live there, and they're running him out. Like, so he literally, I think he tries out like 3 different cities. And finally did you hear something weird?
Mm-mm. Oh, I hear bubbles from the can.
Not that. That was weird. It's like a beep.
Yeah.
So finally the powers that be said, okay, you know what? Which, part of me is like, why are you even protecting him? Like, I don't understand. But they're like, okay, well, you'll just live out your last year of probation in a trailer on San Quentin property.
Sorry.
I'm not even making this up.
Run his ass all the way back to San Quentin.
But he wasn't in custody.
Hey, do you know how they got away with that back then? Though?
He had a peaceful trailer with like a bodyguard, like with.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, he should be getting his ass kicked on a daily basis in those cities. But I can guarantee you, as soon as that Joker updated his address or whatever, or probation, and local law enforcement found out, they put the call in like, hey, he's in this city at this address. And then that put the word out on the street. Because back then you didn't have, all like word of mouth.
Like doxing where he's, yeah. Oh, for sure.
I think that's interesting. Back then they even did that. To give everybody, they give them a heads up, like, hey, he's in that town. And and the rise of the vigilantes in the late 70s too, and by the end of the early 80s, he's lucky he didn't get killed.
Well, he's lucky, but other people are not lucky enough. Excuse me. So there he is, spending his time in a trailer on the property of San Quentin for his last year of parole. Okay, so let me pull up. I've got notes right here that we're going to read. Okay. So let me tell you what happened actually from that, because at least I will say this. The citizens were not happy, at least even nationally, when they heard about this. This short sentence, you know, as you can imagine, as we're talking about it here, did not fly over well with the citizens. So this article here says that, this is blurredbylines.com, says that national outrage at the short sentencing for such violent and depraved crimes was unleashed across the country, particularly because they were committed against a minor. I mean, I think at this point that doesn't even matter, you know, in terms of, like I said, recidivism and everything else. As a direct result of his lenient sentencing, California's Singleton Bill, remember his last name is Singleton, was passed in 1987, supported by Vincent, so that's Mary, and other well-known survivors. It carries a 25-year minimum sentence for perpetrators who commit a crime involving torture. So, I mean, whatever. I guess that's better. So then that happened, that Singleton Bill. I do kind of hate that it's like named after him.
You said it was named after him?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let me tell you about what happened since he got out in 8 years instead of being shot by a firing squad. So get this. So he returns finally to Florida. So that's where he originally had been from. And so he's like, I can't even live on the West Coast. This isn't going to work for me. I'm going to go back home to Florida. So he does. And in 1990, he was twice convicted of theft. Oh, by the way, I can't leave this part out. Real quick, when cops were interviewing him about Mary, and he was, you know, before his trial and all the stuff before he was charged, or I guess as he was getting charged, he said that Mary threatened to kidnap him and claimed that she would say that he raped her if he didn't drive her where she wanted to go. And then as to her missing arms, he's not sure. There were a couple of other guys, another guy named Larry, that's his name, or yeah, Lawrence. And he said Larry, another Lawrence, Pedro, and Mary are all in the car together, and that they all paid her for sex. And she did that. And then he passed out, and his friend was driving. And when he woke up, she wasn't there. They said they had dropped her off somewhere. Like, his story changed a million times, but it was ridiculous. Get this, though. He gets out of prison and he tries to sue Mary. Yeah. He tries to sue Mary for, like, he's turning everything around, saying that this was all her, that it was her fault. She did whatever. He's crazy. So in 1990, twice convicted of theft, he served a 60-day sentence for stealing a $10 disposable camera in the spring of 1990. And in the winter, he received a 2-year prison term for stealing a $3 hat. Before his sentencing for the hat crime, he described himself to the judge as, quote, I'm just a confused, muddle-headed old man. This is ridiculous. Okay, so in the spring of 1997, when he should still absolutely be in or under the jail, a neighbor called police. So one of his neighbors, some sources say that a guy was there, like an electrical guy, somebody was there fixing something, or that the neighbor had come outside. Either way, calls police to report that Lawrence was assaulting a woman in his home. The witness account says that he heard the screams and that he heard bones breaking, and he said, quote, like chicken bones snapping is what he could hear.
Mm-hmm.
And when he walked in, Lawrence was standing over a woman who was a bloodied woman. So she was a prostitute who actually was a mother of 3 and had come at his call. She was covered in blood, and he is standing there covered in blood, naked, and raises his arm and comes back down on her. 911 or police are called. They get there. He's just there. She's there, dead, slumped over the couch at this point. And her name is Roxanne Hayes. She'd been stabbed multiple times in her upper body. Again, she was a mother of 3. So when he gets I say questioned. I mean, they see it, right? They see what's happened.
Mhm.
He's there, she's there, the whole thing. But his version of the story is that that she was trying to rob him,
Mhm.
and that they started to get in a tussle over this. And she had a knife in her hand, and she accidentally stabbed herself multiple times when they got in a tussle.
Mhm.
And when she was losing consciousness, she asked him to console her. And he held her upper half of her body and rubbed her head until she was not breathing anymore.
Mhm.
The amount of women who accidentally stab themselves on this show, meaning Nightshift, we talk about it all the time. It's a phenomena I didn't know existed.
Well, the good news is he locks himself in each time, but even with these ridiculous
he's always there.
lies,
He's always a part of it.
Setting up the Larry and whatever.
Daryl.
Yeah.
Any Newhart fans?
That's
No. So anyway, so this poor woman dies a violent death at the hands of a man who should have never been on the streets whatsoever after the first thing that he did. Bless you. Take a drink. What'd I tell you? So Mary Vincent, though, right? So now this was 1997. All right. So it's been 9 years later. So, I mean, this was just, wait, actually, she was 19. So it's almost been 20 years now because he was in jail for 8 years. A few years went by. He does this to Roxanne Hayes. He kills her. So now it's been about 20 years later. So Mary's in her 30s, and Mary traveled from California to Tampa to appear at his sentencing.
Ooh.
Mm-hmm. During her testimony, she described their Singleton's attack and the toll and the ordeal that it had taken on her. And on February 20th of 1998, the jury found Lawrence Singleton guilty. And on April 4th of 1998, the judge sentenced Singleton to death. I will tell you, just to give him a little bit more grace, the judge in the first trial where he only got the 14 years, he did say at the trial that during sentencing that if he had the powers, he would have been putting him in prison for the rest of his natural life.
Okay.
But that was the max sentence that he could have gotten, I guess, for what he did. But for attempted murder?
Crazy.
Mm-hmm. So check this. We've got a photo of Mary here. So this is her during her, like when she testified at the court trial for the murder of Roxanne Hayes, to describe everything that he had done.
Mm.
And there she is. Nasty old man. Ugh. All right. I'm just showing pictures again. I'll put these on Andrea Up Late, Instagram. So he died in 2001 of cancer in a prison hospital at the North Florida Reception Center in Stark, Florida. So let me tell you a little bit, though. I don't want to make it all about him. Let's talk just a little bit before we go about Mary and her life as the years went on. She did have some struggles, as you can only imagine. A failed marriage, one or two failed marriages before ultimately getting married to a man that she's been with now for quite a while. Had a couple of children. Unfortunately for her, though, remember at the beginning I told you that she and her parents weren't necessarily they were close, but it just wasn't necessarily the super nurturing kind. Her perspective on it is when all of this happened afterward and during her recovery, her parents kind of couldn't handle it. And so the way she will word it is that they were too consumed with what they felt about what had happened to her, that they couldn't really handle her dealing with what happened to her. Like it was like almost too much for them. They were all consumed by it. So they couldn't really guide her through the healing process of all of that. So she kind of didn't spend as much time with them after the fact. I mean, she was just a kid. That part is pretty horrible. It's unfortunate. But today her last name is McGriff. It's Mary McGriff. She's married to her husband, Tony. They have 2 adult sons. She's in her early 60s now. She lives in a small Washington town. But she's not let being an amputee stop her from doing anything she wants to do. And I think that we had some foreshadowing with that, right? I mean, just her perseverance in getting herself out of the spot she was in early on. So she's always fancied herself a, quote, tinkerer. And what that means for her here is that she has these prosthetics on both arms, but she's actually like tweaked them. So she kind of used different engineering and electrical parts and all these things to tweak her prosthetics to do more than as much as her hands could do, just about, but more than other prostheses will do. And so actually some other engineers and prosthetic makers, if you will, have kind of picked her brain about this a little bit and, talked to her about it. Excuse me. So they want to, I guess, replicate her work. And so in the years after surviving the attack, she faced, as you can only imagine, some severe bouts of depression, insomnia, other conditions, basically PTSD. But she started drawing. So remember, she'd been a dancer and she could no longer dance now. So she started drawing, which she had not ever really done prior to this event. And she said that drawing helped pull her out of her depression. So art became her like full-on lifeline, her complete distraction, her huge focus. So it's estimated that she's produced around 4,000 pieces of art since she lost her arms. And she has sold or mainly donated, I think all of them, but like 7 or 17. She doesn't really draw as much now because she says she doesn't need it anymore to be happy. She said, I'm just happy with life. And she just said this a couple years ago in 2023. She said, there's so much out there. It's beautiful. It's not a matter of looking for it or making it happen. You should just accept happiness when it does come to you. So just super incredible. She actually, when I talked about like tweaking her prosthetic arms in a way that would like help her, do different things with them, that was really spurred on by her newfound love of drawing. And so she was able to fashion so you might have noticed she has the hooks, right? So the prosthetic arms with the hooks at the end. This actually is a pretty good, here's one of her drawing actually. And so you can kind of do a lot with those. They all have different types of contraptions that make them work. A lot of times sometimes they'll strap over your shoulder. So you actually use your shoulder muscles to control the hooks. I'm not sure exactly how hers were fashioned to work, but she kind of changed them up in a way that allowed her to, I think she described just like sweep the pastels, sweep the pencils over the paper in a more continuous fashion. So here's a couple more pictures of her walking her dogs. Here she is. Here's one of her playing pool. So as you can see, she's continued to just, really, be a badass. And I know that I'm not making light of anything, I know that I'm sure there's been plenty of times over the years that's not what she felt like at all. But yeah, I just thought that was incredible. So that's the case of Mary Vincent. And so unlike most of the cases we have, we talk about, our victim in this story turned out to be a survivor and an inspiration. So, yeah, so that's her thing. She's done a ton of interviews and stuff. That's that.
So he was from Florida. It's like Florida and California were wide open with, you know what I mean? Like, serial killers and just like violence, I think on that scale. I don't know.
I'm learning Iowa is. Brett, you in the chats? Good Lord.
Yeah, that's true too. Yeah.
We have found more things that took place in Iowa than I ever knew.
There's got to be something to that. You think?
They're bored. It's too cold.
Yeah.
They lose their minds. Maybe it's like the is there corn? A lot of corn in Iowa?
In Iowa, I do feel like Iowa, Nebraska. I'm about to show my ignorance.
I know Indiana has a lot of corn.
I'm not good at geography.
Y'all, is there a lot of corn in? Yes, the corn. Tyler's actually in the chat saying it's the corn. I was going to say maybe the corn fermented.
It could be.
And they're all walking around like they've been on like homemade wine.
Corn wine.
Corn wine.
I don't know. It is weird. I never thought of Iowa like that until recently.
And they're not even just like your run of the mill, like a robbery and a shooting. These are like, I'm going to go out of my way to make this the most jacked up murder you've heard of. And Tyler said, I have no idea. He said, it's the corn. I have no idea.
It's got to be the climate too, and just the remoteness, maybe.
Yeah.
Because I think about like around where we are, everybody seems just happy, and the climate's great, and people smile a lot.
That's true. Abby said that story puts things in perspective. I mean, it does. It's, whenever you hear someone who's endured such horrible, I just can't. There's so many parts of that story that are horrible. You can break it down into so many aspects. I don't know. It's horrific.
I think the mindset of like her arms thinking, okay, I got to stop the bleeding in 1978. Like, how am I going to do that? At
15 years old.
Yeah. Stick it in the mud and then raise them above my head. So she already kind of understood.
She had not seen Grey's Anatomy.
Is that what they did in Grey's Anatomy?
I don't know. ER?
Oh, I was thinking like in Rambo, he did it for much different reasons.
There you go.
And in Predator, much different reasons. To put all that mud on. But, Colonel Sanders. There's a story that Colonel Sanders fell. I think he was driving a car.
Okay.
Fell out of the car, wrecked it, whatever. Busted his head open. And when citizens were stopping, he was en route to go to a work meeting. Citizens stopped to try to help him, and according to their statements, he was like, I gotta be somewhere, and he took mud and stuck it in this like huge incision in his head, packed it in there, and took off.
Well, that's what happens when you are the owner of a multi-million-dollar fried chicken conglomerate that you started when you were 60 years old or something. I think it was like 60 or 61 when he started KFC.
Yeah,
you gotta be somewhere. There's no time for a head wound.
He's my great granddaddy. I'll have to ask him. No, but I think there's a lot to that. Like just knowing stick mud, and I don't know. I hate that anything bad ever happens to anybody, but I also like she stuck it to him. You know what I mean? Like in court over and over again, going there and speaking.
Yeah, I love that she went those years later to that murder case.
Like him saying that to her, like I want to be able to whisper in his ear, like, yeah, like, bring it, dude. Like now we get to have
he said,
fun.
I don't care. I mean? Yeah, how many years it takes or however long it takes, I'm going to finish the job.
Yeah, it's kind of like that old scene from A Bronx Tale, where the mob boss tells the bikers in the bar, "Have your beer and leave." And then they're like, oh, yeah. And they're drinking their beer. And then they're like, they start tearing the bar up. And he's like, before that, they start getting rowdy. And he walks over to the door because he tells them to leave. Then they're like, F you. And they lock the door and they say, no, you just can't leave. And then they just beat the brakes off these bikers. It's the same thing. Like when the killer or the assailant, when they threaten people and they get all empowered by it, it's a great feeling when you tell them like, oh, yeah.
Like this is how it's gonna be.
Oh yeah, like this, like you getting ready to unleash. Yeah. Horrible.
Yeah, he just tolerated the thing. Now you can't leave.
Yeah.
Hey, Bosco. We got Bosco in the chats. Leave. Now you just can't leave.
It's so great because people that operate that way on like fear and intimidation, and they don't understand when someone's being nice or kind, and they're like, "Oh, hey, dude, like, you're about to earn every bit of pain you're going to get." Anyway,
if you're just tuning in or just turning us on here, obviously we have finished the case, and so we're just kind of bantering, if you will. Yep. Spring has sprung.
Gosh.
Brian Sanders sneezed 2 times. What do you think we got next week? Y'all want to send me a message.
A bet.
Yeah, send me a bet.
Man, if the pollen keeps on.
It will. It's not even barely started, honey.
Yeah. Look how pale I am, too. We gotta get some sun.
Yeah.
Well, we don't. Real. I do. I am pale rider.
Do you have any questions in the chat?
No,
Nobody cares.
What is this grab ass? Iowa and Nebraska do grow a lot of corn and it produces more humidity.
It probably does.
The syntax of that statement tells me a lot.
Does it?
Yeah.
It says, Bosco's got a good update. His uncle is cancer-free now since his surgery last Thursday.
Oh,
That's great news, Bosco.
Mm-hmm.
Bosco said something about buying everybody tacos today on Facebook, so that'd be cool too. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that's what you said, right, Bosco?
Did I say Dusty Rhodes was the...
You did.
the wrestler of the year by... Okay. Just curious if I mentioned it. I didn't mention movies, though. There really wasn't any in 1978.
Mm-mm.
That year was kind of lacking in movies. It's actually, you start like scrolling through and you're like, oh, like very depressing, violent horror movie. Ugh.
And where? In 1978?
In 1978, yeah. There were not like a lot of big blockbusters or anything.
Let's see here. We got this. You can keep talking.
I always talk. Marines Bloodsick, and we just stay streaming until the end of
his shift.
Yeah.
Usually it's the end of his shift.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wait. So it's gonna be. Yeah. Let me give you a little something. Well, this is a little 1978.
Oh.
Right there.
Oh man.
Right. Hold tight, y'all.
I know it's late. I know you're weary.
Okay, that's it. Sorry.
Mm.
I know it's so good. You guys go listen to that song.
They do. I mean, honestly,
Bangers.
That's one of the go-tos for us.
Bangers.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, we love y'all.
Mm-hmm.
You got anything?
Mm-hmm.
All right, you guys can go follow Brian on Instagram at Brian Sanders Disruptors. You can follow him on his YouTube channel there as well. For any of our platforms, if you like, subscribe, leave messages, do whatever, that's great. And it helps a little bit, moves us around in that algorithm. I got a delightful message on Spotify the other day, so that's fine. It doesn't have to be nice.
Hey,
it's
a comment
still
is a comment.
Interaction.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
evidently I needed to drink more water that day. I will do better, everybody. But
I'm going to go on the record and say that person, whoever made that comment, has got to be one of the biggest losers in life. I mean, that's just putting it mildly.
Just a miserable human being.
Miserable, hateful, sorry ass person. Raggedy. They get a stamp of.
Anyway, I don't care what you write. It's interaction, so we appreciate it. But in saying that, follow Brian Sanders over on his YouTube page or his Instagram, or both, actually. And you can visit him on his website at
the Disruptors of BrianSanders.com.
that one. That's the one.
Yeah.
And again, all of my stuff is under the name of Andrea Up Late. So be it and on like Spotify and stuff, it's Nightshift with Andrea Up Late. But yeah, shoot us an email if you have any case recommendations. We've got a few coming in lately, so I need to follow up. Liz Marie has requested the same one a few times, and I've been terrible about it. So look into that a little bit. But yeah, we always like to hear what you guys have to say. So let us know. And I think it says Iowa is 62 today with a blizzard tomorrow.
Again,
That's
read
crazy.
into that statement.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I'm
going to go on a limb and say that's not even true. That's complete nonsense.
There's a blizzard.
there's a pattern. I
Which one, the 62 or the blizzard?
Both. I think the person I'm thinking of would say some stuff like that.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think so too.
All right. Well, we appreciate y'all as always. We are thankful to see you and thankful to chat with you. And I think with that, we'll wrap it up. I'm getting a little hungry, maybe.
Yeah, I am too.
All right. Would you like to tell the people good night?
Yeah, good night, everybody.
All right. All right, guys. Well, as always, until next week, we will see y'all next Tuesday. Good night, y'all.